The strongest stimulus is an imbalanced microbiome. Focusing on how to put back in balance our microbiome so that it's not a liability but an asset, as should be, if we have a symbiotic relationship with the microbiome, is probably the best way to mitigate the risk of inflammation because of lost barrier function.
Dr. Alessio Fasano is a pediatric gastroenterologist and chief of the Division of Pediatric Gastroenterology and Nutrition, and the head of Mucosal Immunology and Biology Research Center at Massachusetts General Brigham, MGB. He is a professor of nutrition at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. In the year 2000, his group discovered zonulin, a protein associated with gut dysbiosis that regulates intestinal tight junctions. His basic research focuses on bacterial pathogenesis, gut microbiome composition, and function in health and disease, the regulation of gut permeability, intestinal mucosal biology, and immunology, and SARS-CoV-2. He's the director of the Center of Celiac Research and Treatment at MGB and widely sought after as an expert in celiac disease, intestinal permeability, and autoimmune disorders. Dr. Fasano is also the author of Gluten Freedom and the co-author with Susie Flaherty of Gut Feelings, the Microbiome, Our Health. I'd love to welcome Dr. Alessio Fasano to Take Back Your Health with Dr. Amy Myers. I am very excited to welcome really one of my heroes in the space of health and someone who I've interviewed a few times before, but it's been quite a number of years. So I'm excited to welcome Dr. Alessio Fasano with us here to Take Back Your Health with Dr. Amy Myers. Welcome, Dr. Fasano. Trying to combine Alessio and Fasano together.
We can go Alessio from now on, but thank you, Amy, for having me again on your podcast.
Well, great. Well, it's been a number of years. So for those people who aren't familiar with you, as I mentioned, you're one of my heroes because of all of your research in intestinal permeability, gluten sensitivity, celiac, all of the things that I'm very passionate about. I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your work and the work of your team. But for those who don't know you, do you mind sharing your story? I mean, you really are the forefront researcher of intestinal permeability. So do you mind sharing with us, how you became that person?
Again, there are two ways that people can approach this. To give the sanity of the story so that, they think, okay, I was smart enough to think about it and I did this on purpose, or the real deal that in general, as typically happens, is by chance. It was just a serendipitous path, so to speak. As a matter of fact, this path started many years ago. I was very interested in the real diseases in general, both acute with infections and chronic like celiac disease. And after that, I finished my training in Italy, specific on the physiology of the gut. I decided to look at the other side of the moon and go to a place in Baltimore to learn more on the bacterial side. So in other words, how microorganisms can make us sick and develop problems and so on and so forth. And in doing that, I was tasked to develop a vaccine for cholera. That, at that time was a big deal in terms of, mortality. It still is, but, big impact, particularly in the pediatric population. Long story short, I developed this vaccine, doing everything that I was supposed to do. And contrary to the expectation, these people that got the vaccine, that should not have given any reaction, they still had diarrhea, and I didn't know how. So I was very disappointed after 2 years of work. All this work literally flushed in the toilet, no point in that because they got a lot of diarrhea. And then, reasoning how that, happened, I ended up to discover a toxin that had a mechanism never described before that made the intestinal leak. And this toxin led to another series of discoveries to try to understand why we have a system that makes the intestinal leak and makes an increased permeability. And at that time, we didn't know that this system exists. And, ultimately this led in 2000, so more than 20 years ago now, 25 years almost, to discover a molecule that's called zonulin that is now still the archetype of a variety of conditions that can make, your intestine to lose gut barrier function. And that's how I got into the business.
And so with cholera, the endotoxin does increase intestinal permeability. Is that correct in how cholera?
Yeah, at that time, there was one toxin that we were aware of, that it was cholera toxin, that is the most powerful toxin to make you to develop diarrhea. If you take 3 grains of sand out of the beach and you eat that amount of cholera toxin, you purge almost, 10 gallons of water in a day. And I eliminated that from this vaccine, but, cholera had a backup solution with another toxin that I ended up to discover that, worked with different mechanisms by making the intestine, more permeable.
In the last 25 years, and this may be too broad of a question, and let me know if it is, I mean, what has changed? Because, I started on this journey in about 2008. So that was and at the time, I think you had just had some of your research published, and it was on the cover of Scientific America. And still, people would come into my clinic having gone to their GI doctor saying, the layman term for intestinal permeability is leaky gut. And, it was just, again, no pun intended, poo-pooed by their gastrointestinal doctors. And, it seems to be coming more mainstream. You see, virtually every influencer on, Instagram and TikTok talking about leaky gut now. But really, what have you seen change in the last 25 years?
It has been a total shift of paradigm. So in other words, as you said, when this was discovered, published, there were 2 camps. The believers that mostly, I would say almost exclusively, were, the complementary medicine folks. And the non-believers that poo-pooed, as you said, yes, point intended, truly say this is voodoo science. There were the established investigators, evidence-based, researchers, and so on and so forth. So for the first few years, this discovery was accepted with a huge amount of skepticism, to say the least. Fast forward in 2024, because that's the beauty of science. When you publish something, either you went in the wrong direction, so it was a dead end, and nobody was able to reproduce your data, or you end up to go to the right direction, and this, results will be validated by other people, and so on and so forth. Now, 2024, there is no discussion anymore that such a thing exists. The debate is maybe if you call leaky gut, barrier function dysfunction, or antigen trafficking problems, whatever. But the concept is that one in the past we thought that there was no such a thing, that the intestine was covered, and other barriers, I have to say, not just intestine, but the intestine is the most studied of all, are impermeable. And the intestine is made by a single layer of cells that were cement to each other. So the space in between cells was considered to be completely sealed and cemented. So the first thing was the discovery that there is no cement but doors, meaning that you can open a door, close if you have a door. And then the discovered zone is that, yes, they can be open. It can be open for long enough to put you in trouble, so that you don't defend yourself by keeping out of your body, instigators of inflammation, so to speak. And that, again, was accepted with a great level of skepticism. But over the years, studies like a whole genome sequencing, the completion of the Human Genome Project, and then the other evidence suggests that, the common denominator in many chronic inflammatory diseases, metabolics, autoimmune, cancer, whatever, was that among the other stuff, the genes that control antigen trafficking, i.e. permeability, popped up all the time. And therefore, I believe that now there is no such debate anymore. The debate now is how do you call it? But the fact that this stuff exists, I believe, is out of discussion. And this is also testified by the more than 1,000 papers published on Zonulin since we, report this first time.
Did you ever go through a period, so many people that are, trailblazers, as you were in your team, where, we hear stories of people almost getting persecuted in a way for, having a new discovery or a new idea. Did anything like that ever happen with you, or was it just belief or disbelief?
Persecuted may be too strong of a word, but definitely I was a single out for sure, not invited to meetings anymore, or, particularly from the standpoint of classical immunologists. I still, receive harsh, comments. But once again, that's the beauty of science. If I was wrong, I would be the first one to admit, and the story would be over. But, again, this is not out of my hands. So, it is interesting that, the story repeats itself. The same happened with celiac disease when we published that it was frequent in the United States, and everybody said, absolutely not. You just mismanaged your study. And then over time, people confirmed. And now who will even conceptualize to see that celiac disease spares the United States? That would be a nonsense. But believe it or not, when we published this, it was exactly the same. With the Zonulin story, the same situation. Definitely, when you go from there are two ways to do science. One is incremental. I'm at point A, I want to go to point B. I can see where I start. I see where I'm going. Your peers will understand what's going on. And therefore, that's the kind of science that is more accepted in the mainstream line. And then there is transformational science. You are in A, you want to go to B, and you end up in Z, a place that nobody has been before. Most of the time, again, at dead ends, and that's the end of the story. But sometimes that brings to a revolution of science. So what is called the transformational science. Transformational science at the beginning has no friends because you put people out of the comfort zone. Because it's something that you have to think out of the box. But, science is not a linear path. We know that, the constellation of Nobel Prize in medicine have been of people that really stumble on transformational science. So, and their acceptance at the beginning has been extremely, extremely complicated. So people do not accept. So that's the nature of the business.
We're thankful for people like you that are willing to go out on a limb and, be ostracized or not invited to the meetings for a while. And then, yes, luckily, hopefully people are changing their tune. Well, back to zonulin, can you explain, to the layperson what exactly is zonulin and what's its role? What exactly is it doing? And then I guess the second part to that question, some things that you're aware of, we know gluten, that can trigger the release of zonulin.
Yeah. So back to what I was mentioned before, if you consider this structure in between cells a sort of gates, zonulin is the key. So in other words, we have these gates all over our body, particularly the part that needs to compartmentalize our body from different kind of environments. The most important are the barriers between us and the environment. And of those, the two major are the airways and the GI tract. Again, both are covered by a single layer of epithelial cells that, again, are interconnected with this very sophisticated, highly dynamic structure. But most of the time, these doors are closed so that we have that barrier function and therefore the protection that we want. But if there are doors, that means that physiologically we need once in a while this door to be open to allow stuff to come in and then to be closed very fast. And this is what we do when we have to sample what is in the environment so that our immune system is prepared to face the environmental factors that can be useful or harmful for us. Technically, this is called antigen sampling. So I sample what is out there so that I'm prepared to fight if I will have to do that. Now, there are conditions that unfortunately will make zonulin to produce inappropriately in terms of timing and quantity. So these doors, rather than open and close very fast, they got stuck open. And that allows junk like, endotoxin from, bacteria and undigested foods to come through your body. And, what is next depends on who you are genetically speaking. Some people are able to have an immune system and clean the mess and you have no clinical consequences, but other people, they are not capable to. And that will have, consequences that can, be pretty serious. Now, of the 1,000 papers that I told you that have been published out there, these are all papers that connect, zonulin upregulation, so an excessive production of this key, to a variety of conditions. metabolic disorders like type 1, type 2 diabetes, or obesity. Autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis, of course, celiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and so on and so forth. Cancer, neurodevelopmental problems like autism, neurodegenerations like Parkinson and Alzheimer, and the list goes on and on and on. And the reason why, because, the loss of barrier function and leaky gut is one of the 5 pillars that now we understand they are necessary to develop a disease, together with genetic predispositions, or we have to have the genes to develop this problem, the exposure to something in the environment that instigate the inflammatory process, for example, gluten for celiac disease, an immune system that is hyperbelligerent, is not able to control the inflammation, within limits that are good for us, but it goes out of control, so you have this chronic inflammation. And then last and not least, the microbiome. An ecosystem that really dictates if, when, why, and how our genes are put in motion, switching from genetic predisposition and clinical outcome. Of the stimuli that produce, that instigated the excessive production of zonulin, one that you mentioned is gluten. The other one is indeed a microbiome off balance. Dysbiosis that probably is the strongest stimulus that has been found so far to instigate an excessive and inappropriate production of zonulin. And therefore, the fifth element come in place, and now you have the perfect storm to switch from genetic predisposition to clinical outcome.
You had mentioned, I think, in the Scientific America article, this 3-prong approach. So now we're believing it's a 5-prong approach. And at the time, the last time that I interviewed you, which was many years ago now, you were believing and suspected that this was also true of cancer. We had already, proven or knew that this was there for many other inflammatory diseases and certainly autoimmunity. And now has this been proven? Is there research showing that really intestinal permeability is a key for cancer as well?
There are several reports suggesting that, a loss of barrier function is also a key element that indicates for cancer. So, Mother Nature doesn't do stuff too complicated. There is redundancy when you come with a specific pathway that leads to clinical outcome. Now, if indeed, and now I believe that, everybody agree that even cancer has an element of inflammation there, then, the corollary of that is that to have inflammation, you need to be instigated by a trigger. And this trigger comes from the environment. And, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, these elements are kept at bay outside our body unless something goes wrong with these barriers. So it is intuitive and expected, to say, and now it's been proved, that even in cancer, barrier function are jeopardized.
When we last spoke, I also believe we talked about genetics, that at least with celiac, we are now seeing people who do not have the genes for celiac getting celiac. And I imagine that is the case amongst at least many autoimmune conditions. So can you speak to that?
Among all the things that changed since we spoke last time, genetics probably got the most violent acceleration in knowledge. Thankfully, this was achieved because, at the time that we spoke, to do a whole genome sequence of an individual was a matter of $100,000, $150,000. So, of course, who would be able to do that for research purpose? It would be an enormous amount of money. Now you can do that with $400. And therefore, we got huge information about genomics. And one thing that we learned is the following. There is no such a specific gene that is associated to, or group of genes that is associated to, let's say, celiac disease or type 1 diabetes, MS, or cancer, and so on and so forth. So, and again, we learned this by the studies in which, before that we can afford to do whole genome sequencing of everybody, we were looking for specific mutation in genes that can be linked mechanistically to these problems. So let's say that we found a mutation on the specific genes for celiac disease, and then we try to confirm this mutation in another cohort of people, and we were not able to. And then that for cancer and so on and so forth. What was the lesson that we learned? That we were looking at this painting too close, track by track, and we didn't put ourselves back to see, what this painting is really representing. And out of metaphor, what we learned that is, it's not important the gene is involved, but what this gene does for living. So let's say that the gene controls the way that the immune system decides when to do inflammation. There are a plethora of genes that are involved in that kind of control. So you and I may have the same disease, let's say celiac disease, but for you, that gene is gene X. For me, is gene Y. Different genes, but they do the same business. So it's more important the function of the genes rather than gene per se that is involved. And, for that reason, looking at the genome or the genomic component of disease, it becomes extremely complicated because there is all this variability of the matter. But it makes much more sense if we look at what this gene does for living. And therefore, now we know that, again, that's one reason why a leaky gut came into the picture, because systematically people have seen in this disease to have genes that can be different from one individual to another, but they all control gut permeability or lung permeability or the permeability blood-brain barrier. That it's a common denominator, again, in a variety of conditions with chronic inflammation.
Now that we know that leaky gut intestinal permeability is one of the 5 pillars and a huge part of many of these chronic conditions, which, as you and I know, conventional medicine is really not great at solving. It's okay at treating symptoms. It's not great at solving. So short of those of us that practice functional medicine, why aren't doctors going to that route and starting there, or even approaching it as these 5 pillars and looking at it? Is this the classic, it takes 17 years after the research been proven to get it into medicine? I mean, it's been that 17 years. Is it that they're really just waiting till we get a zonulin blocking drug and they're going to go there? I mean, what's your opinion now that we're almost 25 years past your discovery? It's in the mainstream now. People are talking about this. Doctors are recognizing it. But I don't see that practices are changing short of those in functional medicine.
First of all, even if it's been 20 plus years have been discovered, the acceptance is much more recent. And nobody will invest time, money, or effort to do anything until, people they have that aha moment. Yeah, this is a fair target to eventually mitigate inflammation in a variety of conditions. And that aha moment probably happened, I would say, shy of 10 years ago or so, maybe less. And ever since, a variety of drug companies start to think about, targeting permeability as a fair possible target to mitigate inflammation. As you said, the great advantage to go that route is that what we have right now is to go after the consequence, i.e. inflammation, with all this medication to stop inflammation, starting from steroids, for example, all the way to biologics. But they really go after the consequence and not the cause. It's like that you have pneumonia, for example, and you take Tylenol. Of course, the Tylenol will bring the fever down. But, finish the effect of Tylenol, the fever will come back up, because the reason why you have, a fever, i.e. an infection, is still there. Unless you eradicate the infection, that will not go away. So people then now realize that, we have better understanding of the mechanism that leads to inflammation. And now they try to go after the reason rather than the consequences. And, targeting antigen trafficking with permeability business is one of the fair target that people they were looking for. And this effort, once they realized that this was a possibility, because again, it's shy of 10 years, and by the time they put the act together, the most advanced clinical trials that now are in phase 3 for zonulin inhibitor, for example, started relatively recently. And it takes 15 years, roughly, if everything goes well, for a drug to be developed. But in the meantime, we start to learn another wealth of information in which maybe that we don't need a medication to do this. If it's true, as seems that it's true, that, the strongest stimulus is an imbalanced microbiome, focusing on how to put back in balance our microbiome so that it's not a liability but an asset, as should be, if we have a symbiotic relationship with the microbiome, is probably the best way to mitigate the risk of inflammation because of lost barrier function.
Right. I mean, if we get a zonulin blocker, I mean, I'm sure that will be, amazing for many reasons. But again, you're sort of targeting this one thing. But if you still continue to have the out of balance microbiome, you still continue to perhaps eat one of the things that is causing leaky gut, or be in an environment or be exposed to the thing that's creating the leaky gut, what's going to happen? Do those drugs still work in the face of these continual insults? Do you need to be on the drug lifelong? What are the side effects of the drug?
It's like taking the Tylenol business, as I was telling you before.
Right.
It will
Right.
work, but you will be stuck to take this forever. And again, there is another thing. When you have a drug, you have friends, meaning, they are investors and so on and so forth. But when you talk about lifestyle, that can have similar effect, like, changing your diet, your lifestyle, exercising, and so on and so forth. No friends there, because there are no investors to invest in something that's for free for everybody, meaning, to diet.
And you mentioned, antigenic sampling. And is there a positive role at all that zonulin plays?
Absolutely.
Because I always describe it as the drawbridge, and that our gut is semi-permeable and we allow these, micronutrients to get through. It's how we digest and absorb our food. And then when zonulin comes, it allows these bigger molecules that maybe aren't supposed to get there. So I guess, what is a positive role of zonulin? And if somebody takes that away, what could be the effects of that?
That's right. So again, without going too much in deep biology and nutritional concept, but let's talk about nutrients for the time being, okay? As the most simple example. Nutrients are an asset if they are dismantled into single elements. Let's say, proteins are dismantled in single amino acids, triglycerides in monoglycerides, complex sugars like starch in simple sugar. So that can be absorbed, that can be used by us for energy or to build our own, biological blocks, our own proteins, and so on and so forth. But if nutrients are absorbed undigested, so in other words, they found a sneaky way to come in our body, they are perceived as enemy, and they instigate, an immune response. Classical example, food allergies. It's nothing else that undigested food that comes through our barriers that will instigate, if you're genetically predisposed, an immune response that translate in food allergies. So that is pathology. But why we want to open this door once in a while? To do what? Because that antigen sampling, the same, elements that come from food, for example, like let's say casein or lactoalbumin from milk. If their sample is small amounts, allow the immune system to develop what we call mucosal tolerance. So to stay put, do nothing. So that I'm familiar with the molecule, and I know that I should develop a break to do anything about this, when it comes to my GI tract, so that in the meantime will be digested in single elements. But if I got this great stack open, not minuscule amount, that we call antigen sampling, but the flow of stuff will come in, and that will be a problem, because now you overwhelm the immune system and say, whoa, wait a second, there is an invasion here. I got to do something about it. And of course, when there is an invasion, you deploy weapons. And when you deploy weapons and you fight, there is collateral damage, there is inflammation.
I know at one point you said you believe that gluten can cause intestinal permeability in everybody. It's just a matter of for how long and, to what extent. Is that still your opinion today?
It's not an opinion, now it's a fact that has been proved by many people. But again, this fact has been, quote unquote, manipulated by the people that want, for example, sustain the unsustainable hypothesis or, points that everybody should go gluten-free. yes, gluten makes intestinal leak to everybody, but the vast majority, as we mentioned before, of people that have no problem with gluten, when they eat gluten, there is a quick on and off opening, and theoretically can be even of advantage to help this antigen sampling. There are a few that are having, problem with gluten, what we call the gluten, the spectrum of gluten related disorders like celiac disease, with allergy, gluten sensitivity, and so on and so forth, that, exposure to gluten will create an increase of zonulin release that is much, more, robust than it's supposed to be, and makes the production of zonulin to be so much that, again, these gates will get stuck open. Those are the ones that, again, will have advantage to eliminate gluten from their diet. Say that, we all, if we exceed with gluten-containing foods, will have a sustained increased permeability. So the common sense is, no, not everybody needs to go gluten-free, otherwise we'll be extinct as a species. But we all should be capable to diversify our nutrition in a balanced way. So everybody, and I'm pretty sure that people that will listen to podcasts will rely on what I'm going to say, knows that if you eat an entire pizza rather than one or two slices, you will be out of business. Because you're going to have, problems in GI symptoms. Turkey, the same story. We know that turkey, it's good for you. It's a good stuff for you. But if you eat too much, you're going to fall asleep, and you know why. So, everything needs to be balanced and in moderation.
Well, and, having a wide variety diet is the key to having wide variety in a microbiome. So how exactly is it the byproducts, like if someone's having SIBO or candida overgrowth, or just an overgrowth of certain more pathogenic bacteria, what exactly is happening when your microbiome is out of balance that then creates the intestinal permeability? Is it releasing zonulin in some sort of way?
SIBO is the classical example in which you face vis-a-vis, if you have SIBO, you have increased gut permeability 100% of the time, because, that creates the condition to, have an excessive release of zonulin. And the reason why is physiologically is obvious. The reason why we have this is so harmful, why we do this. Well, SIBO is a condition that is the acronym for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth for too much microorganisms in your small intestine. The small intestine is not sterile, but they have very few microorganisms compared to the colon, in which there's the wealth, 90% of our microorganisms is there. So, and we don't want them, because, what they do there, they steal food from us. While in the colon, there is no food anymore. There's just fiber, stuff that we don't use, but they can. But in the small intestine, we have a wealth of food that they will steal. And, vast majority of microorganisms are fermenters. And the final product of fermentation is gas. And that leads to the symptoms that typically people with SIBO, they experience: bloating, gas, abdominal pain, changing bowel habits, and so on and so forth. But why SIBO will instigate zonulin to be released? It's a way to get rid of this excessive bacteria. First of all, they produce toxins. So by opening these gates, definitely stuff from the environment will come in and instigate inflammation, but stuff from our body will get out, particularly water. And that dilutes the concentration of toxin, but also provide that critical mass of fluids to instigate the intestine to move stuff along, what we call peristalsis, so that we wash this stuff out of there. So that was the intent, from evolution point of view, to have that system related to dysbiosis. Then, again, unfortunately, evolutionarily speaking, particularly for people that embrace a Western lifestyle, the dysbiosis is due to other elements that are not, planned by evolution: exposure to pollution, junk food, a lifestyle that is inappropriate, too sedentary, and so on and so forth. And all this will create an imbalance of the microbiome. If you allow me, to put, all this in context, why nutrition is so important to establish a good microbiome. Let's say that, microbiome is comparable to a farm with different animals, in which we want a couple cows, we want, 10 sheep, and 200 chickens, and 10 pigs. Okay, they eat different stuff. And of course, you have to feed more the chicken and less the cows, because you have only 2 cows, so you have 100 chicken. And again, out of metaphor, let's say that the chicken are, the good microbes, the one that, definitely keep peace in there. And, the cows are the, let's say, Clostridiaceae or the Candida, okay, that we want there, but a very small amount. Now, what we do with the Western lifestyle, that we feed much more the cows than the chicken. So we're not going to make eggs anymore because we don't have all 100 chicken. They died, good chunk. And now, rather than have 2 cows, now we have 30 cows because they reproduce. They have wealth of capabilities to reproduce and so on and so forth. And the consequence is that my farm is not producing more than what I was supposed to, more eggs than milk, for example. And we pay the consequences.
How does somebody, again, this gets back to, I guess, to functional medicine, because we have a wealth of different types of testing available to us. But if you go to your regular GI doctor, they're not going to be checking your microbiome. So how does the average person understand the state of their microbiome?
That's a very good question. And to be totally honest with you, we are with the microbiome where we were with human genome a few years ago. We are still in the premise of research because it's too expensive, complicated to interpret the microbiome right now. But we're very fast approaching the point in which we will have the capability to study our microbiome and make inferring, interpretation. If this microbiome is good for me, it's not good for me. If the reason why I'm sick is because I have a balanced microbiome or not. This is premise of research right now. The know-how is there, but the costs and the technicality to do this is premise of very limited number of labs in the world. This was the same for human genome. When we spoke last time, as I told you, the whole human genome, sequence would take a few weeks, $150,000 to $200,000. And only a handful of labs will be able to do whole genome sequencing. Now here in the hospital, I can ask the whole genome sequencing on the kids that I may have to decide which kind of drug to put on because of, Crohn's disease. Should I go left or right? And I just do the whole genome sequencing. And in a week, I will have results with $400. This is going to happen with the analysis of the gut microbiome. We're not quite there yet, also because we don't have rules of how to interpret that. And I'm part of a team, international team, that is dictating these rules. Said that, of course, there are labs that jump the gun because they're trying to make profit. And they claim, right or wrong, to be already capable to do this. But, I give you one example, okay? Just, part of the exercise in, setting the rules of how to study the microbiome. My role in this exercise was, okay, where are the minimal clinical information that I need to have to interpret correctly the microbiome? And we reviewed thousands and thousands of papers that are already published there. It was shocked to me, at least, to learn that half of this paper, for example, did not ask to this individual, have you taken an antibiotic before sampling your stools to do the gut microbiome? Because it's intuitive that if you take, an antibiotic, that would change your microbiome, not because of the disease that I'm trying to go after, but because you took, the antibiotics. If you don't have that information, I can't interpret your microbiome. So, are you on a special diet? As I just said, as a farm, if you are eating differently, that will eventually change the composition of the microbiome because you feed some component at disadvantage to others. So if I'm vegetarian or pescatarian or paleo, I will have a microbiome different than somebody that is omnivore, but not because I have a disease, because I eat differently. And if I don't have that information, I can't interpret your microbiome. So these companies, they're already commercializing, I'm going to check your microbiome and I give you a nice, color-coded, chart to say if you're sick or not sick, if your microbiome is balanced and unbalanced and so on and so forth. Not asking those questions, they cannot really intelligibly interpret the situation. So all in all, what I'm saying, common sense right now is to try to have a good lifestyle to protect and take care of your microbiome. But it's going to be a question of time that what you just said, it will be prime time clinical care, that we can send the samples of our stools out there and interpret correctly the microbiome in terms of function and distribution and composition that will be linked to what's wrong with me and therefore being a target to manipulating the situation there.
What about probiotics and the role of prebiotics, probiotics? I believe you're on the board of a probiotic company.
Several, actually, because again, what these companies are trying to do is indeed that. One, I reached the point that I am aware that my microbiome is off balance. What can I do for it? Mm-hmm. First of all, again, let me go back to the panel of the farm. Okay, the chicken are dying because I'm not feeding them properly. Let me give the food to the chicken. Prebiotics. So in other words, the prebiotics is nothing else than food for specific microorganisms to thrive, particularly the good one. Let's say that, I can't do this by just giving prebiotics. I need to buy more chicken so that I can go back to 100 probiotics. So I bring the good folks, by giving the probiotics. I can put the two together. And this is the symbiotics. So in other words, prebiotics with probiotics. These are the low-hanging fruits when we will have the time to say, okay, because this is what I see in the future happening. I made a mistake not taking care of my microbiome, or I was forced to take antibiotics because I have pneumonia. I got to take it. And I know that I will pay a price. Immediate fix to mitigate the problem is to give probiotics while I take antibiotics. Long-term sustainable diet so that, again, I stabilize my microbiome that will be in a friendly relationship with me. Because, as you said before, I can do whatever you want, giving Zonulin to stop the leaky gut or giving the probiotic to adjust the dysbiosis. But if I continue to eat junk, I will always have an imbalanced microbiome. I got to change that attitude. There is no way around.
And I'm sure, obviously, it's individual, but how quickly do you see that someone can change their microbiome through diet and perhaps adding in probiotics and prebiotics?
You said, it's very individual. And it's not a question of days, I can tell you for sure. This would take weeks, if not months, because now you have to reestablish a biological niche for this, microbes to thrive. You need to eliminate the ones that took over, like the Candida, for example, the pathogens need to get out of there. So it will take time. But, the beauty of this is all extremely dynamic. And again, there is one more thing that is it's something that I strongly believe, because that's my personal interpretation. I may be wrong, but, one may ask, why I, a human being, the most sophisticated biological machine that evolution put on the face of the earth, at least this is what we believe, because we decide. So I want to hear the hands of the chimpanzees, what they think about this. But let's say that we are, okay? Why I need the microbiome? Why I need to establish this relationship with these microbes that, by the way, they make more than my own cells. Mm-hmm. On my body, and they produce 150 times more genetic material than I do. Why I need this? Well, the most logical answer is that, there are winners and losers in the biological world. The winners are the ones that are capable to adapt to change the environment so that you can eventually adapt to your biological function accordingly. The losers, the one that will be extinct, and we have many examples, unfortunately, on animals that are extinct, are the ones that are not capable to adapt very fast. So what are the two extremes of adaptability? The world of adaptability at its best function are microbes. They reproduce every 20 minutes. Every 20 minutes, they make genetic mutation by mistake, keeping the ones that are advantageous and get rid of the ones that are detrimental. On the other hand, it is us. It takes 9 months for us to reproduce, and genetic mutations take generations, so years and years. What Mother Nature did, it was a wonder, thinking solution. I mean, it's something so smart that it's hard to put a grasp around it. Let's make these two worlds work together so that the microbes can change not my genes, but if and when they are expressed, what we call epigenetics. And that makes me adaptable to changes. It's like that you have a piano with 30,000 notes. There are the 30,000 genes that we have. And then you have a piano player, that is the microbiome, that decide which notes to play, what kind of music to play, what kind of chord to hit, and so on and so forth, so that you can adapt to, if I'm in the mood for classical music, I play that. If I'm in the mood for pop music, I can play that. Or if I have an audience that will appreciate more jazz music, I play that. So that gives us that plasticity and adaptability that otherwise, if we are to rely only on our genome, we would not be able to. So all this to say, I may be unlucky because, Mother Nature gave me the wrong genetic cards because it put me at risk for Alzheimer or breast cancer. If I do develop this or not, it's not destiny as we believed before. It's how I play my genetic cards. And all depends how good I take care of the microbiome. A good microbiome will not touch those cards. So that genetic predisposition will remain as such. But if I don't play my genetic cards well, I don't take care of my microbiome, those cards will be played and I will eventually develop the problem.
In your practice, do you practice a functional medicine approach that, okay, so you didn't play your cards right and you got this? Is it your belief, have you experienced, as many of us in functional medicine have, that we can reverse these conditions by looking at that all 5-prong approach?
This will upset you, but I don't believe in functional medicine. I don't believe in traditional medicine. I don't believe in, evidence-based medicine. I believe in medicine. There is only one medicine. It's the personalized medicine in which, both worlds bring to the table huge assets. We know that you cannot resolve all the problems of human, health by evidence-based medicine. Otherwise, why we continue to have an increase of these conditions, despite that, we profess quote-unquote evidence-based medicine. Same story, I don't think that you can resolve everything with functional medicine, but these two worlds integrated are the ones that eventually bring us to a better understanding how to manage that. They are the two faces of the same coin. It's not the one is alternative to the other. They are complementary to each other. I come from Salerno. That is a town south of Naples. There was the site of the School of Medicine in Salernitana, the first medical school, in the Western Hemisphere. In 820 was established. So many centuries ago. At that time, the healers, that are now called doctors, were focused on the human being. So the goal was to keep the person in balance. At that time, again, we didn't have all the knowledge that we have right now. They were based all this on the 5 elements, fire, wind, earth, and water. And if you have too much of one, let's say fire, meaning you have inflammation, you have to put something else that counterbalance that, i.e. water, to bring this imbalance in center. So that was the medicine at that time, focus on the individual, the well-being of the individual. Then we come up with, the understanding of basic diseases, and we forgot the individual, and we went after diseases, organs. That's the reason why I'm a gastroenterologist, because I look at my organ, and I don't look outside that, and so on and so forth. Now, there is an understanding that we made a mistake. I mean, they were a necessary passage, maybe. But now, with the concept of quote-unquote personalized medicine, we're going back to the human being as the center of attention. Because, again, as I was telling you, you and I may have the same disease, let's say celiac disease, but we may have been reaching their final destination by a different path, meaning that we need a different approach. That's personalized medicine. The best way to do personal medicine is, one, to have the scientific basis to be evidence-based how to approach that, and two, the savviness of complementary approaches in which you personalize your intervention with the concept not one fits it all. There is no drug on the market that I'm aware of that has 100% efficacy in everybody with that kind of disease. There is no such a thing. That's per se is telling me we're not made all equal. So we can't just work on evidence-based medicine. We need the complementary aspects to really customize this intervention.
And so through personalized medicine, are you able to reverse many of these chronic diseases?
That's the other reason why I've been crucified heads down by my colleagues, because they said, when you break tolerance, there is no way to reverse these conditions. And the answer, I don't believe that. The evidence doesn't say that. Let me give you an example. Celiac disease. I don't think that there's a debate anymore that celiac disease is an autoimmune disease. Okay? It has all the rings and bells as an autoimmune disease. Autoantibodies, they are the biomarker, by the way, the disease. There is an autoimmune insult to the intestine. There is the immune, machinery of an autoimmune response. So everybody agrees, okay? And the corollary of classical immunologists is that, autoimmunity cannot be reversed. Yet, being the only autoimmune disease for which we know the trigger, that is gluten. We don't know what makes people sick with diabetes and MS and so on and so forth. If I remove the instigator, one of the 5 pillars, and I leave beyond everything else, I leave the genetics there, the leaky gut there, the immune system that is still hyperbelligerent, and the microbiome, but I take the instigator out, then what happened? That everything shuts down. That the autoimmune response will shut down because, the immune system, the hyperbelligerance is not hyperbelligerent anymore. The intestine will not leak anymore because gluten is not there anymore. The microbiome will not act anymore because it's not exposed to stuff that comes in and put this out of the balance, and the autoimmune process will be gone. Matter of fact, the symptoms are gone. You do the biopsy, the damage to the intestine is gone, and so on and so forth. So that is the quintessential example that you can revert a chronic inflammatory problem. But let me tell you something else, okay? And this common sense that, the detractor of the idea that stuff can be reverted cannot have an intelligible answer. Let's say that they are right. Let's say that, indeed, once you break tolerance, you can't fix that anymore, okay? How you make sense, evolutionarily speaking, that this disease will continue to increase over time? All these diseases, diabetes, Alzheimer, multiple sclerosis, they all in the ramping upwards, autism, and so on and so forth. What is my advantage to maintain these genes that put me at risk of an autoimmune disease without any return on investment? Evolutionarily speaking, I will be eliminated because that genes wouldn't give me only detrimental outcome and not advantages, right? Mm-hmm. But on the contrary, they're increasing in such short period of time that you can't blame genetic mutation. We change the environment too fast for us to adapt. So if that's our fact, this is our epidemiological observation. That means, one, these genes are too important for giving up with them. Let's say zonulin. If we give up with zonulin, yes, we're not going to have leaky gut anymore, but we're not going to be able to do that physiological function that keeps me alive. Okay? An immune system, if I give up with the capability to unleash inflammation, imagine what will be the devastating consequences, because, we develop, 100, cancer a day, and they would not go anywhere because the immune system will keep surveillance of these, cancerous cells. So clearly I can't give up with that. Meaning that, if I had genes that put me at risk for chronic inflammation, I cannot turn off anymore. Evolution speaking would make no sense. So that means that there must be something else that keeps the inflammation ongoing. And if I remove that, I can take care of the inflammation. I gave you celiac disease as an example, but probably would be the same with everything else. So if I have a process of inflammation in my brain that brings me Alzheimer, that would progress because the instigator inflammation is keep coming in my body. If I stop that, maybe that I can slow down the process or even, stop the progression and eventually reverse the process if I have mechanism of repair of that neuroinflammation.
Absolutely. I mean, I obviously wrote a book about that and saw it time and time again in my clinic. So let's actually go back to the celiac example, if you don't mind, where yes, if you've removed the gluten, we can get rid of celiac, but let's say that the person continues to eat a junk diet, so their microbiome really doesn't repair, even though they remove the gluten, or it continues, or they're exposed to some other toxin that keeps zonulin rampant. We did get rid of gluten, but as you and I know, many of these diseases are not specific to one instigator. It's specific, many people have multiple instigators. So, I often warn people that though maybe you got rid of the gluten, that if you don't go in and fix their microbiome or go in and fix whatever else may be releasing zonulin, you are now setting yourself up to some other potential autoimmune disease, because we know once you have one, you're 3 times more likely. I mean, is that, I just think just taking it at gluten face value, and that is what many people do. They get diagnosed with celiac and they just get rid of the gluten. But as we also know, many people through molecular mimicry with a gluten allergy sensitivity may also have sensitivity towards casein. And, if people aren't getting rid of that, or maybe they're being exposed to a toxin in their environment, all of these people in North Carolina, with cancer being exposed to toxins.
If you get rid of gluten, definitely that will take care of celiac disease. But, if you want to maintain your machine well oily and functional, that's not enough, because, like anybody else, you need to continue to have a healthy lifestyle. It's like to say, I've been smoking, 3 packs of cigarettes a day for 20 years. Now I quit. So my risk of lung cancer is gone, but I go on the motorbike without an helmet on. Of course, I have the risk to die of a
head injury.
Head injury. It's or don't use my seatbelts when I'm in the car. So of course you gotta continue to make sure that your microbiome is taken care of. Otherwise, you will develop other problems.
Are you using anything in your practice, or have you seen any studies using various supplements, things such as L-glutamine, some of the, that have helped to repair intestinal permeability along with removing the triggers?
Yeah, I've seen many supplements that can do the trick. I personally don't use them because I like to go natural, because it's more educational, so to speak. So, for example, if I give L-glutamine, I may give a short pass to people to continue to eat junk. Well, I say, what, you should really change your diet, and let's try a Mediterranean diet in which the proportion of stuff is what evolutionary we're supposed to have, i.e. a lot of fruits, a lot of wild vegetables, nuts, tubers, olive oil, and so on and so forth. Yeah, meat, but, very scarcely. And, you want to have a slice of pizza, that's fine, but once in a while. So that, for me, I achieved so many goals by comparing to give you a shortcut, say, you continue to do whatever you want, and then take the L-glutamine that will fix your problem. That's my personal attitude. At least not to say that L-glutamine or polyphenols are not fair supplements to take, by all means. It's the same story, if I have a mother that is, waiting for a baby to be born, definitely I invite to have a good diet, but I give polyvitamins so that, that she has some extra, vitamins to rely on. Not because there is a strict needs, because if you have a good diet, it will come, but just as an extra safety net. So I don't see the problem to give, supplement in that sense, but not an alternative to, but complementary to
Absolutely.
Lifestyle.
Yeah, I definitely never recommend those as a free hall pass.
I'm sure. Well, the problem is not, the healthcare provider, is the attitude of people that, particularly in the Western world, we want the easy fix. I'm tired, give me something there. I'm obese, give me a pill to lose weight, or, that kind of stuff. You got to work toward that. I say obesity because reason now I'm very concerned with what's going on with the old LGP inhibitors. That is a shortcut, and we see huge consequences in which, again, people, they don't want to work toward the goal.
And when you're saying huge consequences, are you saying in muscle loss and nutrient absorption?
All the above. And again, this is not sustainable because, if you stop them, you have a rebound effect. And, any medication, that is intended well, that is taken for too long, will have consequences. And, we're too early in the process, but it's all intuitive that, if you inhibit, pathways to control your anger, physiology, it's going to have consequences. And remember that, anger is probably the most ancestral and conserved, instinct in an animal kingdom for a reason. And it's controlled in so sophisticated way that by putting a roadblock there, I will be shocked that we don't have a domino effect that will be negative in other domains. It also changed the perception in terms of food and food craving and that kind of stuff that can have negative impact on the psyche of people and that kind of stuff. I think that this is not a way to go. In other words,
And so you're an advocate of the Mediterranean diet, it sounds like, for yourself and your patients?
I am an advocate for a Mediterranean lifestyle because you can eat as good as you want, but you sit on the couch for 12 hours and you are super stressed and you sleep 3 hours a night and you take your life too seriously, that will not do any good. It has to be lifestyle.
And so what are you excited and passionate about now? What's on the horizon for you and your team and your research?
I'm pretty sure Galilei said the same on his time. I believe this is the most exciting time to be in science for what is at the horizon. What I foresee in the future, it's, something it's like the following. I go to Emmy's office. She told me to bring my sample of stools and, my wearable device that she gave to me, that in the meantime, I've been monitoring on a daily basis my heart rate, meaning am I stressed? Am I exercising? I am, doing what I typically do, or is deviated by, recording of 2 weeks ago and so on and so forth. While she visited me, my microbiome and metabolism profile would be done there. She has in her computer my whole genome sequencing that we all have a birth. And by the time of visit, she put all the stuff together and said, listen, Alessio, with your microbiome the way it is, based on your genetic background and your behavior, because, I not only got the heart rate, but your glucose level, your lipid profile, and everything will be, real-time access on a wearable device that you will have access in real time. And all this data will come in this AI modeling. You say, if you continue like this in 10 years, you have 89% chance to develop Alzheimer's. And we got to do something about it. And you will tell me exactly what to do, hopefully the diet and lifestyle. And, in the real time, you will tell me, Alessio, I told you to change the diet. I still see the same level of cholesterol, glucose there after 2 weeks. Are you doing what you're supposed to? And we, as patients, would take ownership of this because, rather than, it's the old time in which, I go to the doctor or healthcare professional, he or she would tell me what to do and I execute. Now I want to be part of the equation because I want to take ownership, as we do with our cars when, we change oil and make sure that they work. While we don't do the same for our own body. The goal, again, is not to live forever. The goal is to live as long as Mother Nature decide that we have to leave, but, in the most efficient, independent way.
2 questions. One is, how far off do you think that is? And the second part to the question is, do you see, I know you're not distinguishing between functional and conventional medicine, but for the sake of this conversation or this question, conventional medicine, i.e. insurance-based medicine, do you realistically see them adopting that? Because if most of what we hope in that is diet and lifestyle recommendations and not, now here's your metformin and here's your, lisinopril and all of these pills to make you do this, do you foresee that really being adopted in conventional medicine in the insurance-based model? Because how will they make money?
The first question, The honest answer is I don't know, because it's hard to predict, but it's going to happen much sooner than you can even expect. This is a tsunami. It's a snowball that is going downhill, and it's only grow bigger and faster. It's going to be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. I don't know. But there are a lot of companies now that do wearable devices to do that kind of stuff that I was telling you. There are a lot of people that they do AI modeling and so on and so forth. So this is going to happen fast. I don't know how fast, but definitely much sooner than you would expect. The second question, I think that again, the insurance would embrace this because it would be much cheaper to prevent it than to treat. So if they still will ask me to pay the premium, that is their asset, and you give them a chance to decrease the liability, so in other words, to try to treat people with chronic conditions, they will save money. So for them, it's much cheaper to maintain somebody lean than to pay for metformin. That's a given. The question is, are the
drug companies
in tune with this? I don't think so.
Right.
I definitely don't think so. And they have a huge leverage, actually, politically speaking, to lobby to maintain the status quo. An example for all, there is a strong push from, governmental and state policies to stratify the patient's population for a target intervention so that we know beforehand who will respond to a drug, who does not. So in other words, what we call, identification validation biomarkers for therapeutic response. Of course, the drug companies, they don't want that, because if I have, let's say, Crohn's disease, they want to give the medicine to everybody. Even beforehand, we know already that only 45, 50% of the people will respond, because the other 50%, it's revenue. But with this new policy, they will, decrease their revenues by half. And, again, we're talking about, survival. Like in biology and human, life in general, there are winners and losers. The loser is the one that will not adapt. I believe there's going to be a point in which drug companies, if they will not adapt, will be extinct. I do always this example to my students. They might even not know, they are too young, but you probably remember Kodak. Mm-hmm. Kodak was a company. Do you remember Kodak?
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Older than I look. My son, he doesn't know what I'm talking about. Kodak was a company that almost, the totality of the market of the photography. And they didn't see digital photography coming at all. Actually, it was proposed to them, and they said, absolutely not. This will go nowhere. In a matter of 2 years, the Kodak went from 93% of the share of the market to 15%, 1.5. So the same happened to drug company. If they will not adapt, maybe they're trying to do drugs. They should do,
the AI and the apps.
Exactly.
Or the testing.
The biomarkers. Mm-hmm. Or, link this to specific, diet components. Invest in dietary, interventions. Because I'm convinced that not all, but the vast majority of conditions can be treated with diet in the near future, when we have all this information. Adjust the diet accordingly.
I 100% agree. And it is nice. I mean, I do think that, it's going to be a supply and demand, situation. And people are, as the testing and supplements and things, get more scalable, get more cost effective, and more people can afford these things. And they see that they work. Right now it's getting better, as you've said, but certainly back when I was practicing, it was cost prohibitive for most people, right? And to come see me, I was cash-based, and I only saw a couple of patients, and I charged for my time. And, as things become quicker, more accessible, people are going to have people that don't right now will have more access to this, and we'll see that their condition will get better by changing their diet, by taking a probiotic, by maybe taking some L-glutamine. And then, it's just going to be this upward movement from really the people demanding that they know they don't have to take these toxic drugs and do these extremes in order to get better or live a life in pain.
I think you're right, because, it's, these are the movements from ground up. So nobody would decide other than the people they are constituting the business. And there is another thing that I keep saying to everybody, if you want to foresee the scenario 5 years from now, you better adapt to what's going on. Because, if I have to take a drug, it's an extra step that I have to do in my life. I have to eat anyhow, 3 times.
Right.
I better do this right and take 2 birds in one stone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as usual, this has been extremely fascinating. I'm so appreciative of everything that you've done and that your team has done for, intestinal permeability, getting this out there, being, going out on a limb and taking risks. Before we part ways, I always like to ask my guests just 3 suggestions, 3 things that you recommend our listeners can do today to take back their health.
Don't take yourself too seriously. Life is too short to be stressed out, because stress is a key component of if you live, a long or a healthy life or a short and miserable life. So glass always half full. Take care of yourself and your neighbors, because that's part of the syndicate, because it's not just my affair, but it's the community affair. If I'm good, but the others are not, nobody will win. Because, we are in what is a global world of one health. If I'm healthy, but the environment is sick, just talk about microbiome, I'm going to end up to regain a sick microbiome. I drink good wine, good Italian. Red
I thought wine was bad for us. It increased our
glass of good red wine with the polyphenols in there. It's very, very good for you. Italian wine.
All right. Do you have a brand that you recommend? Favorite?
My favorite is quite expensive. It's called Brunello di Montalcino. Brunello is it's a great wine from Tuscany. A little bit expensive, but definitely worthwhile once in a while for good celebrations, but not for daily use. Too expensive.
Well, you are literally changing the world, so I think you deserve a glass of good wine, whether it's nightly or every so often. Well, and also finally, just how can people find you? Their website, your clinic?
Yeah, again, we are, of course, if they Google me, they will find everything, including my social security number. But, our website, our Center for Celiac Research and Treatment, MGH, and, you can find, all the information and go beyond that. A lot of stuff that we just, I know that you are definitely a bookseller. There is a top-notch, book writer. We have, with Susie Flaherty, done this book that is called, Gut Feelings, that discuss a lot of stuff that we discussed today on the microbiome. If people would be interested, all the money that we make will go back to research. We don't make any profit out of it. And if we, instigate some intellectual curiosity, I believe that that's a good source of factual, discussion about leaky gut, microbiome, and that kind of stuff, diet, and so on.
Well, thank you so much. Well, it was great to see you. And again, I appreciate you and everything that you and your team are doing for the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy, for having me again.
I want to thank this week's guests for sharing their time and knowledge. And thank you for listening. To read the full show notes for each episode, which include a summary, timestamp, quotes, and any resources mentioned, please visit amymyersmd.com/podcast. Lastly, if you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love if you would leave a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify, and we'll select a few to read out loud in a future episode. Tune in next week to hear from another inspiring guest as we help you take back your health.